Clara Matthews had everything a woman could want: a loving husband, a baby on the way, and a peaceful life in Silver Creek. But when her loneliness led her into the arms of another man, Ethan Cole, the secret she thought she could hide became the spark that ignited a deadly chain of events. What began as forbidden love soon spiraled into betrayal, rage, and a chilling murder that ended deep inside an abandoned mineshaft. And as the town searched for answers, one truth became undeniable: behind every perfect marriage, there can lie a darkness no one sees coming. Clara Matthews had always been the kind of woman people described as blessed. She lived in a neat white house on Willow Lane, with flowers lining the porch and a small rocking chair that creaked softly in the wind. Her husband, Daniel Matthews, worked long hours as a foreman at the Silver Creek Mining Company. He was respected, dependable, and known for keeping his head down and his hands busy. To the outside world, Clara and Daniel had the perfect marriage. They attended Sunday service together, hosted small barbecues for neighbors, and seemed to have everything figured out. When Clara announced her pregnancy, it only strengthened the illusion that their life was flawless. Everyone in Silver Creek congratulated her, calling her glow the look of happiness. But behind the smiles and polite conversations, Clara's heart carried a quiet ache. Daniel's work schedule had grown heavier over the past year. He often left before dawn and returned after midnight, exhausted and distant. Their conversations had become mechanical, about bills, groceries, and doctor appointments. He tried to provide everything she needed, but his absence left her lonely. The long nights stretched endlessly, and the silence in their home began to feel suffocating. Clara found herself yearning for attention, for warmth, for someone to notice her not just as a wife or a soon-to-be mother, but as a woman. One afternoon, Clara's car broke down outside Cole's Auto Repair, a small garage run by a newcomer named Ethan Cole. He had recently moved to Silver Creek from a neighboring town, looking for work after his own shop failed. He was easygoing, with oil-stained hands and a confident smile that seemed to melt away Clara's unease. As he fixed her car, they talked about the town, the weather, and trivial things that somehow felt important. Ethan's charm was effortless, and for the first time in months, Clara laughed. Really laughed. When he handed her the car keys and told her there was no charge, she felt a spark she couldn't explain. In the days that followed, Clara found excuses to visit the garage again. Sometimes she said the engine was making a strange noise. Other times she claimed the tires needed checking. Each visit stretched longer than the last. Ethan began to notice the sadness in her eyes and the way she hesitated before leaving, as if she didn't want to return to her quiet house. Slowly, their friendship deepened into something unspoken but undeniable. As spring turned into summer, Clara's secret life took shape. She met Ethan in hidden corners of town: an empty park at dusk, the back road near the river, the field behind the old grain mill. He made her feel seen and alive, emotions she hadn't felt in years. Yet with every stolen moment came waves of guilt. At home, she tried to act normal, forcing smiles during dinner, avoiding Daniel's eyes as she folded his work shirts. The weight of her deceit grew heavier with each passing day, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. The loneliness that had once haunted her had been replaced by something even more dangerous: desire. Unbeknownst to Clara, the walls of Silver Creek had ears. The town thrived on gossip, and small details rarely stayed hidden for long. People began to notice her new glow, her sudden energy, and her frequent trips into town. The local cashier mentioned seeing her car parked near the garage a few too many times. A neighbor caught her walking alone late in the evening. Whispers started, soft at first, then louder. Meanwhile, Daniel remained oblivious, or so everyone thought. But he was not as unaware as he appeared. He had begun noticing small changes: the faint smell of unfamiliar cologne on Clara's clothes, her distant expression, the way she avoided his touch. He told himself it was just pregnancy mood swings, but deep inside, doubt was beginning to take root. As the days grew longer and the summer heat settled over Silver Creek, Clara stood at the crossroads of two worlds, one built on loyalty and duty, the other on passion and risk. She convinced herself she could balance both, that no one would ever find out. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and somewhere, someone was already watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to uncover the truth. The gossip around town began to grow, subtle at first, but persistent. In a place like Silver Creek, where even the smallest secret spread like wildfire, Clara's strange new habits couldn't go unnoticed. She was seen driving to town more often than usual, sometimes staying for hours without explanation. Her phone buzzed constantly, and she'd step outside to answer it, speaking in a quiet tone. At first, Daniel didn't think much of it. He told himself that the pregnancy was making her restless, that perhaps she just needed to feel less confined. But over time, the little things started to feel wrong. Daniel noticed her phone always face down on the counter, messages deleted, her eyes distant during dinner. When he reached for her hand, she'd pull away too quickly, smiling to hide the discomfort. He had always trusted Clara completely, never questioning her loyalty. But trust has limits, and the silences between them had begun to feel like walls. Every night when Daniel came home, he sensed something had shifted. The warmth was gone. Ethan Cole, meanwhile, was also changing. What had begun as a thrill, a secret connection with a married woman, had turned into an obsession. He wanted more than hidden meetings and quick goodbyes. He wanted Clara fully, openly, without lies or fear. When Clara told him she was pregnant, his mind spiraled. He couldn't stop wondering if the baby might be his. The thought both terrified and excited him. He started imagining a future with her, away from Silver Creek where they could start over. But when he brought it up, Clara refused to listen. She said she couldn't abandon her husband, not while carrying a child. Her rejection cut deep, and Ethan's charm began to fade, replaced by frustration and bitterness. Daniel's growing suspicion led him to start paying closer attention. One evening, after another long day at the mine, he drove past the gas station near Main Street and saw Clara's car parked outside. It was late, too late for errands. He slowed his truck, keeping his headlights dimmed, and spotted her standing behind the station with Ethan. They weren't touching, but the closeness between them was enough to confirm what his gut had been screaming for weeks. Daniel sat in his truck for nearly an hour, unable to move, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. He didn't confront her that night. He went home, sat in the dark, and stared at the wall until morning. In the following days, Daniel's behavior became unpredictable. He was quieter, colder, and his eyes carried a hardness Clara had never seen before. She noticed the change but didn't understand the cause. At work, Daniel began making mistakes, his mind lost in looping thoughts of betrayal. The image of his pregnant wife with another man played in his head over and over again. He tried to convince himself there was some misunderstanding, but the truth was too clear. The pain twisted into anger. Clara, sensing the tension, grew more nervous. She avoided Ethan for several days, afraid that someone might have seen them together. But Ethan's messages became desperate. He wanted to see her, to talk, to make plans. Against her better judgment, she agreed to meet him one evening at the edge of town near the old grain silos. They spoke in hushed tones, unaware that a pair of headlights glowed faintly from a nearby road. Daniel had followed again. He watched them from a distance, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Every ounce of restraint he had was slipping away. When Clara finally returned home that night, Daniel was already inside, pretending to be asleep. She slipped into bed beside him, unaware of the storm brewing beneath his calm expression. Silver Creek, in all its quiet charm, had no idea that beneath its calm surface, jealousy was turning deadly. What had started as whispers and glances was slowly evolving into something far darker. A slow, inevitable descent that would soon end in blood and silence. Clara woke the next morning with an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake. Daniel had left early, as usual, but something about his silence lingered in her mind. He hadn't kissed her goodbye or even whispered a soft, take care. The air in the house felt heavy, and she tried to convince herself that it was just the weight of guilt pressing down. The affair with Ethan had turned into a source of constant anxiety. What once felt exciting now felt like a ticking clock, counting down to a disaster she couldn't prevent. She told herself it had to end, that she needed to protect her baby and restore what little peace she still had left. Ethan, however, didn't share her resolve. When Clara met him at the small clearing behind the lumberyard to tell him it was over, his expression darkened. He couldn't accept it. He insisted that Daniel didn't love her, that she would be happier with him, that he could take care of her and the baby. The desperation in his voice scared her. She asked him to leave her alone, but his words clung to her like shadows. By the time she returned home, her hands were trembling. She locked the door, sat on the couch, and cried quietly into her palms. She had made her decision. She would end it for good. Days passed in silence. Clara ignored Ethan's calls and texts, blocking his number. But the sense of being watched followed her everywhere. Sometimes she thought she saw a figure standing by the road or a car parked too long near the corner. Her nerves were stretched thin, and her once bright home began to feel like a cage. Daniel noticed her unease, but instead of asking, he observed. He had become distant, cold, and eerily calm. He spoke less, yet his eyes followed her every move. Then one afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He said nothing, only asked if she wanted to take a drive to the outskirts of town. The suggestion surprised her, but she agreed, thinking maybe he wanted to reconnect. They drove in silence for miles until they reached the old Merrick mine. The mine had been closed for years after an accident killed 2 workers, but it was a place they once visited in their early days of marriage. Clara remembered laughing there, their voices echoing off the rocks. Now it looked forgotten and grim, fenced off with rusted wire and warning signs. Daniel parked the truck and stared into the distance, saying nothing. That evening, Clara didn't know it, but Daniel had already confronted Ethan earlier that day. He had tracked him down at the garage and waited until closing time. What happened next wasn't witnessed by anyone, but Ethan never came home again. Some said they heard shouting near the woods. Others said they saw Daniel's truck parked by the river. The truth remained hidden. All that was certain was that Ethan vanished without a trace, leaving behind his phone, his tools, and an unpaid rent bill. 2 nights later, Clara disappeared. She was last seen leaving her house just before sunset, telling a neighbor she was running an errand. Hours passed, and when she didn't return, Daniel called the sheriff to report her missing. He played the part of a worried husband perfectly, his voice steady, his concern convincing. The town mobilized to search the surrounding areas, combing through fields, rivers, and wooded trails. Her car was found a few miles from home, abandoned on the roadside with the driver's door ajar and her purse still inside. The disappearance of Clara Matthews shook Silver Creek to its core. The pregnant woman who had once been the heart of the community was gone, and no one could explain how. As days turned into weeks, rumors began to spread. Some blamed strangers, others whispered about Ethan's absence. But the one who seemed most broken, the grieving husband who stood silently at every vigil, was the very man who had buried the truth deep beneath the earth. And somewhere below the surface, the old Merrick mine hid a secret that was about to be uncovered. The disappearance of Clara Matthews consumed Silver Creek. What had once been a quiet, trusting town now buzzed with unease. Flyers with Clara's smiling face were pinned to every store window and telephone pole. Volunteers combed through the woods, drained ponds, and searched abandoned cabins. The sheriff, Tom Reynolds, coordinated search parties day and night, but every lead led to another dead end. The longer she stayed missing, the colder the case seemed to grow. Daniel, her husband, stood before cameras with trembling hands, begging for her safe return. His voice cracked at the right moments, his eyes glistened with what appeared to be genuine grief. People offered him sympathy, dropping off food, flowers, and prayers. But behind his sad eyes was a dark secret only he knew. As the search stretched into its 3rd week, Sheriff Reynolds began noticing inconsistencies in Daniel's story. There were gaps in his timeline, strange hesitations when asked simple questions, and a calmness that didn't fit the situation. He claimed he last saw Clara when she went out for groceries, yet no store clerk remembered seeing her that evening. Her phone had been turned off just an hour after she left home, and the last signal placed it near the abandoned Merrick mine. The sheriff decided to send a team to search the area, even though it had been closed off for years. The mine was a haunting place, surrounded by old machinery and piles of rusting metal. The air was heavy with the smell of earth and decay. Most of the entrances were sealed, but a narrow pit on the far side of the site remained open, hidden behind overgrown weeds. As the officers swept the area, one of them noticed something pale caught between the rocks, a small piece of fabric. It was floral, torn and faded, but it matched the dress Clara had been wearing the day she vanished. They expanded the search, digging through the loose gravel, and what they found froze the entire team in silence. Just below the surface lay a shallow depression leading into one of the mine's vertical shafts. When they shone their lights down, they saw what appeared to be a human form. The recovery was slow and heartbreaking. The remains, though partially decomposed, were quickly identified through dental records. It was Clara. Her body had been wrapped in a thin blanket and thrown into the shaft. The coroner later confirmed that she had sustained blunt force trauma to the head and bruises on her arms and neck. Most horrifying of all, she had been alive when she fell. News of the discovery spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. The town that had prayed for her safe return was now mourning her death. Sheriff Reynolds immediately turned his attention to Daniel. At first he maintained his innocence, insisting that someone else must have taken her. But the evidence began to stack up. Mud from the mine site was found on Daniel's boots. A fragment of the same blanket used to wrap Clara's body was discovered in his garage. And then came the most damning piece of evidence. A wallet belonging to Ethan Cole, the missing mechanic, was found buried near the mine entrance. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Not only had Clara been murdered, but the man rumored to be her lover was missing too. The sheriff began to suspect that both disappearances were connected, and that Daniel might know more than he was letting on. When officers brought Daniel in for questioning, his mask began to slip. The calm, grieving husband suddenly grew defensive, his voice rising, his words stumbling. He couldn't explain why his truck was seen on a security camera near the mine on the night Clara disappeared. He couldn't explain the bruises found on his arms or the scratches on his hands. The truth was closing in on him, and the man who once seemed so composed now looked like someone running out of time. The discovery of Clara's body shattered any illusion of peace left in Silver Creek. The town's favorite couple had become the center of its darkest nightmare, and yet as the investigation deepened, it became clear that the truth buried beneath the Merrick mine was more twisted than anyone had imagined. The investigation into Clara Matthews's murder became the biggest case Silver Creek had ever seen. The town that once thrived on small talk and community spirit was now divided between those who believed Daniel was innocent and those who saw guilt in his eyes. News vans lined the streets, reporters crowded the sheriff's office, and the once quiet town became a spectacle for the world to watch. But behind the media attention, Sheriff Tom Reynolds was determined to find the truth no matter how dark it turned out to be. He pored over evidence day and night, retracing Daniel's steps, studying surveillance footage, and examining phone records. Everything pointed back to the same conclusion. Daniel was the last person to see Clara alive. The sheriff's team uncovered new details that sealed Daniel's fate. The night Clara disappeared, his truck had been spotted driving toward the old Merrick mine at 9:47 p.m., captured on a traffic camera from a nearby road. Traces of soil from the mine were later found in the truck bed, along with faint bloodstains on the edge of a tarp. Daniel claimed the stains came from a hunting trip, but testing proved they belonged to Clara. Each new piece of evidence tightened the noose around his neck. Still, he refused to confess. He sat in the interrogation room for hours, silent and unmoving, his expression unreadable. When officers searched Daniel's personal belongings, they found a notebook tucked away in a toolbox in his garage. Inside were notes about Clara's daily routines, addresses, and even sketches of different routes leading to remote areas outside town. On the last page, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "She betrayed me. She destroyed everything." The evidence was enough for the sheriff to order his arrest. When Daniel was finally handcuffed, he didn't resist. He looked down, almost relieved, as if he knew there was no point in pretending anymore. During his trial, the truth came out in fragments, each more chilling than the last. The prosecution painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy, betrayal, and rage. Witnesses testified about the tension in the Matthews household, about Daniel's erratic behavior in the weeks before Clara disappeared, and about the night he was seen driving near the mine. The defense tried to argue that Daniel had acted in a moment of emotional breakdown, that he never intended to kill his wife. But when the coroner revealed that Clara had been alive when she was thrown into the mine shaft, the courtroom fell silent. The horror of it all broke through every argument. Finally, after days of testimony, Daniel confessed. His voice was low, cold, and hollow as he recounted the events of that night. He admitted that he had confronted Clara after following her to one of her secret meetings with Ethan. He said she begged him to understand, that she wanted to end it, that she was sorry, but he couldn't see past the betrayal. He told her they needed to talk, drove her to the old mine, and demanded she admit everything. When she did, something inside him snapped. In a moment of blind fury, he struck her. She fell, hitting her head on a rock. Panic took over. He claimed he didn't plan to kill her, that it just happened. But his next actions told a different story. He wrapped her body in a blanket, carried her to the edge of the shaft, and pushed her in, convinced he could cover up what he had done. When Ethan tried to confront him days later, Daniel silenced him too. No one ever found Ethan's body, but investigators believed it was hidden deep in the woods near the same mine. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliver their verdict. Daniel Matthews was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, no tears, no regret. Just the same empty stare he had worn since the day of his arrest. Years later, Silver Creek never returned to the peaceful town it once was. The Merrick mine was permanently sealed, and the Matthews house remained empty, the garden overgrown and the windows dark. Locals avoided the area, claiming strange sounds came from the mine at night. Soft cries echoing through the rocks when the wind blew just right. Some said it was the voice of Clara Matthews, still trapped beneath the earth, a reminder that even the deepest secrets eventually claw their way to the surface.